Hello and welcome back to the Evolution of Medicine News Videocast. It is Saturday, the 12th of March, and I am back here with my partner as ever, Gabe Hoffman. Welcome back, Gabe.
Hey, James. Great to be back.
Good to be here with you. And this week's podcast is sponsored by Embody 360. We had a great launch with them at the Integrated Health Symposium, and more practitioners are starting to get on the list to try out this new technology that really positively affects patient adherence and compliance. Lots of tools for a practitioner to really gain insight into what's going on with their patients. Go evomed.com/embody. Now, you may be thinking to yourself that both of us sound very deep and rich, and that's because now, for the first time, we both have microphones at each end of the conversation. So how's that sounding from your end, Gabe?
I mean, I don't know how it sounds, but it looks cool. It looks like we have legit mics. I'm looking at you and me in this frame, and it looks amazing, like we're radio show hosts, which I guess we are.
Yeah, we are. So let's get on to the first story of the week. It is it's the gut microbiota modulates energy metabolism in the hibernating brown bear. I thought this was sent by one of our community and thought it was very interesting. So the highlights of this article is that brown bear microbiota composition differs seasonally between hibernation and active phases. Blood metabolites differ seasonally in the brown bear, and the bear gut microbiota promotes energy storage during the summer. So super interesting article, and I just wanted to see what your thoughts on this were initially, Gabe, because it's funny sometimes we get these funny articles.
Well, look, I think anything we're learning about the microbiome is amazing. It makes you wonder, like, is all of the intelligence that drives us actually coming from the biome? Or maybe it doesn't make you wonder. It just seems this is the case where, we assumed that the body was handling these systems at deeper and deeper levels, but now we're learning it's the bacteria of the body that's driving the intelligence. And when you think about hibernation, it's one of the most fascinating topics, especially as a kid, when you learn that bears like sleep for a whole season or whatever it is. And, there was that awesome Saturday Night Live sketch back in the day where Chris Farley takes the cold medicine that puts him into a hibernation for 3 months. Then he'd wake up and his wife take the Super Bowl, or I don't know for people who saw that. But basically, hibernation's always been a really fascinating part of life. And we're learning that it's the microbiome that dictates the bear's ability to do that. I don't think it's shocking, but it's awesome. And I when we had Sayer on the last on the forum in Colorado, and he was just describing there how, we have the ability to evolve so differently and so quickly because we're actually dealing with the virome and the biome. And so intelligence and what we're capable of, I feel like, is being unlocked now at a deeper and higher level. And it's always fun to read these articles.
Jeff Bland spoke about the junk DNA in our last forum, and I know afterwards you came up with an analogy about junk DNA for Jeff that he thought was pretty funny. You want to share it here in anticipation of Jeff sharing it at every one of his talks for the next 10 years?
Well, it was in the context of his talk, but he was describing that 98% of our DNA is what used to be called junk DNA, and the 2% is the protein, or just like that has the clear instructions, whereas the puffer fish is 98% protein and has 2% the junk DNA. So I was just trying to see if I got it when I was asking him. I just said, so if the puffer fish goes home and his family is giving him a hard time and he's under a lot of stress, it's not really going to affect his digestion very much. Basically, the whole thing is if the junk DNA is actually the part of us that responds to our environment. And that's why a human being is so malleable and so incredible, how we can change what we're doing based on what we're exposing ourselves to. And we're not written in stone. Your DNA doesn't mean, if you have the genes for this, you're going to get this disease. What it means is we have 98% control of what's happening based on how we work with our environment. But the puffer fish is going to be the puffer fish. That guy is going to look like a puffer fish. He's going to eat like a puffer fish. And regardless how stressful his life is or how much meditation he does, he's going to just be the puffer fish doing his thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, coming back to this bear, it made me, super interesting. Part of that junk interaction is the interaction with the environment, and that's the microbiome. And, obviously it made me think when I saw this straight away, there's such delicate it's the microbiome is so delicate and obviously has such a massive effect on the body. And here we are basically with antibiotics sort of fishing with dynamite, and so you can see how, messing with the gut microbiome, there's more and more studies showing that that's what might be causing, this huge uptick in metabolic syndrome and weight gain.
Sleep disorders.
Yeah, exactly.
You can imagine if we were meant to be hibernating, there'd be a lot of people that were awake while a lot of other people were sleeping for 3 months. Like there would definitely be a hibernation issue if humans had to hibernate.
So basically, by taking antibiotics, you're telling your gut microbiome that you want to hibernate, and then you can't understand why you can't get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, could be, or the opposite.
Exactly. So super interesting article. Check this out. We found this was sent by one of our community. This next one was actually sent to us by our friend Nate Dog over there at Author Molecular, Nate Freeman. Shout out to him. I know he told us that he is a big fan of the news, so give you a shout out, Nate. He sent me this thing from Dr. David Katz, who, if you know, Dr. Katz is a big fan of naysaying, studies that come out. And this one was essentially a study saying that beef was better than beans for health, but he says you got to check the fine print. And he was basically looking at this study where he was,
well, listen, it wasn't a real study, but he made up a headline that basically said, beans are not as good for you as beef. And then when you read the article, it was jelly beans is what he was measuring.
And it was in 72 hours, right?
Yeah. So the whole, his point is we have to read the fine print. This has actually come up on the news before. We've looked at how studies are being looked at and what, what are they really measuring and how are we applying it? And actually it was Dr. Katz. I think when John Weeks was on with us a few weeks ago, Dr. Katz was talking about that the new USDA food recommendations were not really, they weren't using the results of studies. So studies are just really controversial and all over the place. They can definitely be hijacked by corporate agenda or anyone's agenda. And, you got to be careful with it. I was reading, Dave Asprey had an article this week where he talked about, there was a study that came out that said the paleo, high-fat, low-carb diet is dangerous for you. And then, his article about that study basically said that if you read what the study was about, they took 2 different mice. They fed mice like canola oil and other unhealthy fats and some like coconut oil maybe, and then fed the other mice who were supposed to be on the high carb part like fruits and vegetables. And, so it's very easy to manipulate these things. And, I guess it's always interesting to see people who are pointing that out because the internet has allowed us to have more and more access to headlines and things that look sexy. I mean, one of the things about this article is new study, beef best beans for health. And it's the type of headline that people will click or the type of headline people won't click and will just say, oh yeah, I heard beef is better for you than beans. Meanwhile, this guy's just making a total joke. But we're so vulnerable to this now because of the internet, especially in the health world. People have realized you can get so many clicks to your website if you just put some kind of crazy, headline, and you can just make up whatever you want.
It's the buzz feeding of medicine, basically, is what it is, isn't it? Yeah, super interesting. Well, thanks for sending us that, Nate, and glad you're listening to the news. So we want to talk for the last 10 minutes here about someone who's obviously you've been hearing about in the news a lot, which is Mr. Donald Trump or Donald J. Drumpf, depending on who you're getting your news source from. I don't know if everyone saw the John Oliver skit, but it's had 20 million views. He sold 400. How many hats did he sell? 35,000 hats, saying
more than they had.
Trump again. Yeah, they totally sold out. So this is obviously, hitting the mainstream where one side is making fun of Donald Trump and the other side, Donald Trump's like winning and sort of like scheduled to be the next president. So we thought what we'd do today is actually look at his 7-point health plan because he just came up with this last week and for healthcare reform. And so we're just going to go through, what he's talking about and see if it makes any sense. So,
and also, I would just say this is a great opportunity for the audience to communicate and comment and get involved in this discussion because we definitely don't want to say this healthcare plan is great or that it's not great. I mean, we just want to discuss it and hear people's feedback because this is pertinent information for us and our community and our audience. So, let us know.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, we spoke with John Weeks a couple of weeks ago. He was comparing Hillary and Bernie on what their health proposals were. But, we can't leave this guy out. It's like chances are he's going to be the next president if you look at what Nate Silver would say anyway. So let's take a look at this. So part one, completely repeal Obamacare. Our elected representatives must eliminate the individual mandate. No person should be required to buy health insurance unless he or she wants to. I mean, that's quite that certainly, appeals to the libertarian base. And certainly I think a lot of people in our field who necessarily wouldn't use the health insurance that they had because they don't see providers that are covered. I think this is, quite a big sticking point for people. I mean, and I come on to the next part here, which is modify existing law that inhibits the sale of health insurance across state lines. As long as the plan purchased complies with the state requirements, any vendor ought to be able to offer insurance in any state. So, Gabe, I just want to see what your thoughts on this, because it seems like there's maybe something that puts these two things together. And I would say, one of the things I see is like, who would write a law that would essentially make sure that everyone has to buy in health insurance, and that you couldn't you couldn't cooperate, or you couldn't have competition across state lines. It's obvious to anyone who's in the world and seeing what's going on that like health insurance companies helped to write Obamacare and are very involved and are a massive source. And I think one of the reasons why Trump is so successful is because he's sort of like, putting his middle finger up and saying, look, obviously the only reason why there would be a law made that everyone would want to buy health insurance, or the law that, you couldn't buy across state lines, is going to be created by the health companies, the health insurance companies. And I think that one of the things that he's been sensible on is saying, hey, look, if I don't work for, for the lobbyists, then these are the kind of things that I could come out with. But you'd never see anyone who's sort of been in a central park coming out with these kind of ideas.
Well, this is, number one, I mean, if you look at those 2 points, there's definitely, he's looking at creating more freedom and more competition and less control. And this is where politics gets so confusing, right? Because on the one hand, maybe, Trump has been separating and dividing people and saying that, Muslims are dangerous and Mexicans are dangerous and things that are just people are having huge reactions to and rightfully so. And then on the other hand, and on the liberal side, always being, what would seem more culturally open-minded and inclusive. But when it comes to healthcare, it's almost two different arguments, because you're talking about how are we going to pay for the healthcare that's in place, and our audience knows this is not about who's paying for healthcare. This is about the type of healthcare we deliver, and certainly the type of healthcare that's being delivered by insurance companies, whether it's required or not required, has not been up to snuff, has not done the job. So, I think we would lean towards wanting more freedom so that we could use some of the tools that we know help and the tools that are going to create a better health and a healthier country, and not just focus on who's paying for it, but keeping, healthcare at the same, keeping the same type of healthcare, right?
Absolutely. Well, it is interesting to see, because I think, it's a mixed bag of, practitioners that I meet. There's a lot of liberals, there's a lot of libertarians. It's a sort of an interesting mix of practitioners that we see. But I think some of these ideas, like allowing individuals to fully deduct health insurance premium payments from their tax returns. I mean, look, as your premium gets closer to $1,000 or $2,000 a month, which it is for a lot of people in New York at a certain, and certain parts of the country, and these numbers keep going up. I mean, something's going to have to change, because people just aren't going to be able to afford, insurance as the numbers keep ratcheting up.
And that's something everyone can benefit from, right? This is a tax, a deductible that, that affects your taxes, that doesn't just benefit the wealthy.
Exactly. And then allow individuals to use health savings accounts. So I have to say, this was one of the favorite things of the integrated medicine world, is that like you could have your health savings account and you could use it basically at a credit card wherever you want. So he likes the idea of the health savings account. Contributions to HSA should be tax-free and should be allowed to accumulate. These accounts will become part of the estate of the individual and can be passed on to heirs without any fear of any death penalty. these plans should be particularly attractive to young people who are healthy and can afford high deductible insurance plans. So, this is very interesting because a few years ago, I thought this was the way that medicine was going to go, is that you were going to have health savings accounts for everyone, and that you'd be able to essentially save enough at much to, to pay for your high deductible, and that this was the way that we're going to go. But, health savings account went away. And I think they weren't, I don't think insurance companies were big fans of them. And so it's interesting to see this idea. I personally think this is a very good idea. But obviously in the context of everything else that happens, it's interesting. But, I'd love to hear from our community. Did you have patients that had health savings accounts? Did it go away? You guys are on the front line, basically being sort of primary care and, hearing from patients directly. We'd love to hear your thoughts about these ideas. I just never saw this anywhere in the news. And then when I actually read it, I was like, oh, there's some interesting ideas in here. I'm sure our community would be interested in that.
Well, look, I can see why everyone being provided health care for themselves and their families is something that makes sense in a developed country, in a country that can afford to do it, and where there are people who are sick that can't get care. And at the same time, true health is about accountability and responsibility, and making people empower themselves has a lot to do with them taking responsibility for their health, right? And this is what we talk about all the time. So a lot of these systems, if you just look at what's being encouraged, even in this the health savings account, it's like, take accountability. You have to plan. These are things where people would be responsible for their health, and so I could see the benefit of both, and maybe there's somewhere in the middle that things can meet. But certainly we need to be taking more accountability for our health in the choices we make, and the dietary choices we make, and the way we take care of ourselves, how we handle our stress levels. So that's great. And it's nice to think that we'd be able to take care of everyone in the country and not leave anyone out in the cold, unable to take care of themselves in an emergency. So,
absolutely. And there's a couple other things here. Require price transparency for all healthcare providers, especially doctors and healthcare organizations. I don't think anyone will really argue for that, against that in our space. I think if prices are more transparent, more people start using integrated medicine, and I think block grant Medicaid to states. Nearly every state already offers benefits beyond what is required in the current Medicaid structure. And then the seventh one, I just want to read this one out particularly. Remove barriers to entry into free markets for drug providers that provide safe, reliable, and cheaper products. Congress will need the courage to step away from the special interests and do what's right for America. Though the pharmaceutical industry is in the private sector, drug companies provide a public service. Allowing customers and consumers to access imported, safe, and dependable drugs from overseas will bring more options to consumers. What I see as an overall here, Gabe, is just, it's basically a sort of a middle finger to the three organizations that have really, built around healthcare. You got hospitalists, you got, insurance, and you got pharma. Now, all three of these companies, all three of these contexts have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders in that they have to make more and more money every year. And I thought insurance had an incentive. Until recently, I just assumed that insurance had an incentive to reduce costs. But actually, John Weeks schooled me in that, no, insurance is cost plus. If it costs, if your insurance costs $1,000 a month, it's probably costing them $850 and you're getting $150. It costs $2,000 a month. It probably costs them $1,700 and they're getting $300. So they want costs to go up. So you got these three groups that have no incentive to reduce healthcare costs. And I feel like there are some ideas in here that I think will appeal even to liberals and people in our sphere, because I feel like a lot of these make sense. And I think that if we saw a real competition between regular medicine and integrated medicine, especially at primary care, and there was a level playing field, I think you'd see that, the number of people that would be taking up functional integrated medicine as a primary way of taking care of their health would go up. And so I'm not actually that dissatisfied by these ideas, but I'd love to hear from the community as to what your thoughts are, overall, for exactly the reasons that Gabe said. Like, I think that a Trump presidency would be a bit of a mess, to say the least. But I do think that there are some ideas in here that are interesting. And so what do you do? What things do you vote on? I know that's an interesting question too. So just wanted to level up the playing field, I guess, here and talk about it and, start the conversation with our community.
Yeah, I mean, we're reading a 7-point plan on one small aspect, an important aspect, but still a single aspect of a presidency. And it would be nice if, we could have plans like this that weren't attached to people who sound like lunatics most of the time. And,
Yep.
and it's like, why are we choosing between those two things? How is it possible that, oh, well, I like what he's doing here, but he does want to,
Exactly.
I mean, there's just so much going on so many levels that it can be frustrating, and it's good to have something we can bring up to speak about that's relevant to the audience that involves the political situation, because it is there, and this is our country.
So here's your test. Read these 7 pieces, go through them. It's on, if you just Google Donald Trump healthcare reform, check it out. Tell us what you think. Watch John Oliver's 20-minute segment. It's been viewed 20 million times. You'll have a nice objective thing to think about over the weekend. So thanks so much for being with us. This has been the news. As ever, please send us your news to news@GoEvoMed. Thanks so much to our community members that send us the news each and every week. Thanks so much to Embody 360 as well for sponsoring this news segment. Check out Embody, goevomed.com/Embody. And, you can get on the waiting list to start to use their technology. We're very excited about its potential for improving the the service of providers that are doing root cause resolution medicine, that are empowering people. This has been the Evolution of Medicine News Videocast. I'm with my partner Gabe Hoffman. I'm your host James Maskell, and we'll see you next time.